Hello, my name is Roman Djindjihashvili, and this is the DVD I'm recording now and presenting to you, made by multiple requests of our customers. This is the DVD. They wanted little more material on Grand Prix against Sicilian, the way it was played and the way it could be played. Let me tell you something. The format of DVD is going to be a little bit different from all the others. What I'm trying to do here, I'm trying to present you some of the games played lately by me, and I'm presenting my own games only for one and only one reason, because I think I know this system and variations and basic plans better than anyone, because I am the creator. That's the way it works in most of the areas of life. And this is one. And second, I want to explain you the value and importance of playing this opening. You have to understand first, this opening does not guarantee you edge after the opening, but guarantees you absolutely the edge in preparation. If you follow closely what we're going to look, edge in preparation and planning for a middle game. Well, I play this on the internet against quite strong players, some grandmasters, some IMs, some high-rated players. And I have to tell you this, despite the fact that the game are in a blitz mode, you have to take in consideration that players are very high-rated and their opening play is just as good as anyone in the tournament. Normally, high-rated player never thinks on opening moves. They think about them at home. When they play the game, they execute their product of thinking already prepared on the board. Nevertheless, this is the amazing facts. I play and win against these players in the opening about 40% of my game. Another 20% or 30% even, which is going to make about 70, I am getting big opening advantage. So 40% I nearly win, and in 30% more I get big advantage. So here is 70% of absolutely stunning opening productivity, absolutely reliable and good opening. There is no variation. I wouldn't speculate. There is no variation. White has a disadvantage. Everywhere in a worst case scenario, we keep about balanced position. And I want to show you number of games played lately. I emphasize lately, so they played maybe in the last few months, all these games. And I like to play on internet primarily to test this system. And boy, this system did have greatest results of all the openings. So now let's look at some games, the way they continued, and you will see some devastating results right in the opening. So this game was played against me against some GM online, and the game went like this. Grand Prix. And this is knight d4 variation, probably the most popular castle. And the moves made by Grandmaster playing black cannot be too bad, and probably they are very logical and probably something that he would play also in a tournament. Let's see the result. And after this move, well, black hasn't done anything bad. They developed all their pieces, they castle, and they have terrible position. Terrible position because all of a sudden black has kind of problem comfortably protecting the d4 pawn. Of course, they're not going to lose this pawn by force, but there is no good way to protect it. Queen b6 was played. Now, why was played queen b6 and not knight c6? Knight c6 after f5. The threat is f6, and it's very uncomfortable for black. So, in this position, queen b6 was played. And, well, what I did here, it's very important. You see that queen on b6 is not protected. So what do we do here? c3. So the idea of c3 move is to create pressure on d4 pawn. But remember, the only way you can do it is if black's queen is not protected. So black cannot take d takes c and open their dark square bishop. So after c3, there is a pattern that I used multiple times. Remember, pay attention to this. Well, actually it happened in a game. So pattern you're going to see now. Black played f5. They don't want to play knight c6. Knight c6, after knight c6, if they protect the pawn, white has very pleasant dilemma here. They can act two different ways. First, to go f5 as soon as knight leaves the e7 square and play f6, or play the same pattern that happened in a game. Knight takes, and bishop e3. They're going to probably end up with extra pawn no matter what. Actually, similar thing to this happened. So black played f5. They wanted forever to stop white from playing f5 and assault their king. So after f5, e5 was played. Now black's bishop on b7 becomes very good, but black is going to lose the pawn. Knight c6 was played, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop e3. In my opinion, this is already won position. Now, let's go back and to talk about opening result. After queen f2, black has horrible, if not lost, position, because d4 pawn is very difficult to deal with and white has decisive advantage. So what happened in a game after knight takes d4, knight takes d4 and bishop e3? Black played queen c6, bishop takes d4, h6. Now bishop d1. That's another very good move. You see the bishop on a2 g8 diagonal doesn't have good future. Meanwhile, b7 bishop is very powerful on this big diagonal. So what should we do? We have a good bishop on d4, and we have a bad bishop on b3. We play bishop d1 to play bishop f3 next move and exchange our bad bishop for dominating black's bishop, which will give us an extra pawn and better position. That's exactly what happened. Bishop f3, and now bishop c5. Actually, black sacrificed exchange here, but they are down material and no compensation. Game ended very soon. I don't want to go through the end of the game every time because white is totally winning here. I'd rather go through as many games as I can to show you different ideas and some crashing results in the opening. So now I'm going to show you the game against very famous grandmaster, very strong grandmaster, Eugene Nair. And this was also played on internet just not too long ago. And let me show you. Game went almost the same as previous opening, but black delayed knight c6, and now we play now bishop c4. Why do we give check and then play bishop c4? I've explained on previous DVDs a couple of times about this opening that it has to do with some theory that after knight c6, bishop in some variation stands better, black's bishop, on c8 than on d7. And why? If white goes d3, e6 variation, that's where bishop e3, and after knight e7, we can go d4. So if bishop was on c8, black could have played d5. But bishop blocking the queen and d5 is not possible. So this is also can happen in a couple of different variations. So let's see what happened in a game. So here, knight takes d4, and now a6. Well, a6 is to prevent, for example, in case of castling, knight b5. And you see, that's another reason why bishop shouldn't block the queen. Now d6 pawn is probably lost. So black played a6, white castled, and I think I have a serious advantage here. If black castles after queen d2 and rook a to d1, d6 pawn is very weak, and bishop on d7 stands badly. So this variation was not very appealing for my opponent. So he decides to play queen c7, attempting maybe castling long. Or maybe just play rook d8 and make sure d6 pawn is protected. But this is another case of absolute opening disaster for black. We made just a few opening moves, and after knight db5, it's a typical Sicilian type of shot. Pawn takes, knight takes, hanging the queen. White gets 2 pawns for a piece, an absolutely crushing attack. Black is totally lost here. Knight takes f7. Now we get third pawn because bishop on d7 is hanging. And after knight a5, well, I have to point that king takes f7, queen takes d7, attacking e6 pawn, which cannot be protected comfortably because on knight d8, after f5, black might as well resign right now because absolutely crushing f takes e or f takes g is inevitable. G takes f, maybe even rook takes f5. Rook is absolutely immune because both pawn and the knight pinned, and it's a total crush. So that's why he made a desperate attempt to free his pieces. So he played knight a5, knight e5, attacking d7 bishop, threatening knight takes d7, check, and in case that's what happened actually, bishop takes. Now the f file opened, and after king e8, bishop e2. Well, e5 pawn cannot be taken, as you can tell, because after bishop d4. But black's king will never be safe, and white has complete domination on dark squares. Also, they have 3 pawns for a piece. Position is totally lost. So again, in the opening, it was total disaster for black. Let's make a few more moves. I will show you what happened in a game. Knight c6, queen d3, and now queen takes e5, rook a d1. So white's piece is absolutely dominating. Both open d and f files. Now d7, bishop hangs, queen c7. Well, rook d8 will be met by bishop b6, attacking rook, which cannot leave because of the bishop. And after queen c7, queen c3, attacking the h8 rook. And now queen e5 back, queen d2, queen c7. Of course, I don't want to repeat this position. b4. Black is helpless. I'm going to go b5 next move and totally disrupt all pieces. Rook d8, b5, knight e5, bishop d4. Knight is pinned. e7 knight has no squares. Bishop has virtually no squares. Queen g5 is coming, and it's totally hopeless. Knight f7, and after queen h6, queen f8. Mate is threatening, and black simply resigned here. Something like knight f7 can be met with queen takes h7. Knight cannot be protected, and absolutely disastrous consequences. This was, I'm not sure I played it well after knight b5, but position was totally won after that for white. I'm not sure, as I already mentioned, that I played the best way, but that was good enough. f5 is another option here. Absolute disaster in the opening. So right now we saw 2 games, 2 disasters for black. Now let's see the game against another grandmaster. Well, and again, same opening, same way. Bishop c4, knight c6, d3, knight a5. I want to explain you this position. This position, highly favorable for white. Here is why this position, as I said, is favoring white. In order to explain, I have to attract your attention to a couple of facts. You see, 2 pieces are missing on the board. White's light square bishop and black's kingside knight. Now, let's look at general ideas of this opening that can be played many different ways, and this is one of the positions that can be played by both sides. And we take and we go queen h4 and trying to start an attack on the king side. The reason I'm bringing this to you is this is very important to understand. You see, our light square bishop is missing and black's king side knight. White is going to start very strong attack by playing f5, well, in this case, for example, and later bishop h6. And attack that I have explained many times before. Well, in this case, for example, we're going to go bishop h6 and knight g5. You see, black is starting the queenside attack, which is way less effective. Now, how do we compare this position that we had won in the game? Well, in the game, what happened was this. You see, black's knight made already 2 moves to get to a5. Now it's made a 3rd move to take that bishop. This is clearly a time loss. Now, let's talk about white's double pawn on b5. This is much better pawn structure of the king side than if b3 pawn was on a3, for example. Because it's a lot more difficult for blacks to get quick results on the queen side. And the last thing is bishop on d7. If you want to play on a queen side, what is bishop doing on d7? Bishop d7 move is also loss of time. So, black lost between 2 to 3 tempos, and white accomplished what they want. They gave light square bishop for queenside knight. Opening is clear success for white. Now let's see how it could reflect the game. Knight f6, castling, castling, queen e1. All the standard moves, queen goes to h4, e6 move. Apparently, this was a grandmaster, French grandmaster. He realized here that b5 will not have result. Well, experienced player knows that it's very difficult to break through with these double b pawns. So what he wants to do, he wants to somehow play a little defense. But now queen h4. What do we want on queen h4? For example, if black plays some neutral move, we're going to go f5 and bishop g5. I explained it many times that this is nearly deadly pin. Well, h6 is bad for black, and taking is bad because of knight d2 and knight on f6 lost. So the reason e6 was played, that after queen h4 they went d5. Now they want quickly actions in the center. One thing is important to know. When we go queen e1, queen h4, we play for attack. We never want to go e5 because that blocks our bishop and very difficult to attack. Unless there is a specific reason why should we go e5, and that's what was played. This is concrete reason this move wins the game now. Knight e8 has to be played. I have to point that knight h5 will be total disaster, and anyway they take after g4, knight will be lost. So only square is knight on e8. And now we take the queen, take on a7. Now we have clear result of our threatening attack. We won a pawn and we got better position. When you attack, it doesn't always end in a mate. It ends in a, you redeem your attack for some positional advantage or material advantage. We have both in this case. That was played. And after d3, we don't need to look anymore. White has two extra pawns and completely winning position. Another total opening disaster. What I'm doing is I'm selecting games with opening disasters for black. So far, all three games that we looked, they all were against grandmasters. Three grandmasters got total opening disasters. You think they have never seen a Grand Prix attack? Of course they have. You think they are not prepared? They are all active grandmasters playing in the tournament. Of course they are prepared. Nevertheless, you can prepare better by this DVD because you have first-hand information on me spending countless hours on analyzing these positions with the help of most powerful engines, programs, and this was a product of it. And you see three complete opening disasters. And this has to mean something. You can't deny it. So very, very effective way to play against Sicilian. This game was played against some IM on ICC. So regular opening moves. Knight c6 was chosen. e6. This is one of the worst continuations for black. In my opinion, after e6, black is completely lost strategically. The reason I'm showing you this game, because I didn't play the best way I supposed to play. After all, this is a blitz game. But nevertheless, you will see the typical problems black encountered and got terrible position. Bishop takes c6, bc, castling, knight e7, e5. This is all accurate. And after knight f5, I played knight e4. Knight e4 is a good move. Black castled. And here, bishop d2 is very inaccurate continuation. Let me explain the nature of this position and why this position is so bad for black. The way white's supposed to win this game is by totally disabling both black bishops. They're supposed to completely shut the c8 bishop, eventually with c4, and they have to keep the g7 bishop shut as well. So bishop d2 is not the accurate way because black played queen b6, and now white's supposed to win normally this game statically, not dynamically. What I mean by that, they're supposed to eliminate all black's counter chances with king h1, for example, and if queen b6, then b3. Any attempt of creating counterplay should be absolutely disabled, and black will eventually suffocate. A move that was played in a game was bishop d2, enables black to play queen b6, and now b2 pawn is hanging and possibility of c4. Why is it so terrible if black plays c4? Because that completely ruins white's plan. It's a check. Now black is going to take on d3, and we failed with white to shut black's bishops. Black's a6 bishop is very active, therefore it's total fiasco for white. So the bad move was bishop d2. But nevertheless, after queen b6, I had to already take on d6. Now we have different plan to shut down one bishop on c8, but bishop on g7 will be active. c4 check, rook f2, king h1 could have been played as well. C takes d, and bishop c3. Now we want for the white to exchange their square bishops and to keep one bad bishop for black and hope for the power of d6 pawn and possibly dark squares. Black still has a bad position, but I would like to use the formula which will win us this position after opening, completely shutting off both bishops. That plan didn't work because of inaccurate move order. And now after queen takes c2, black got some activity, but still position remains pretty bad. Light square bishop on c8 is hopeless. After knight d5, queen d4. Black's king on h6 is terrible. So what I'm saying here that white misplayed in the opening and still has a crushing position. That shows how resourceful this position is. So queen d8, knight e5, rook f6. Well, it's very hard to defend. Something like queen takes d6, rook f3 should completely take care of this position. Well, in something like now threatening rook h3 followed by discover check with knight, and move like rook f6 will lead to instant disaster after knight f7 check. So knight cannot be taken because mate in 1. And if king moves, black just lost. So that's why in this position, black played immediately rook f6. But this shouldn't be analyzed any further normally, because look at this power of the knights on e5 and c5. Look at the king on h8 and bishop on c8. This is absolute horror picture. d7, rook b8. For starters, we have an extra piece. Rook f3, and as I already mentioned before, now the threat is knight f7 check, fork, with mate with the rook on h3. Rook c7, g4, threatening g5, and game is over. Black lost almost everything. They're losing queen, they're losing rook. Black simply resigned. This game was played also against pretty strong player. He is an IM, but he is as good as any GM. Well, let's see. He knew I would play Grand Prix, and let's see what he prepared. There is a case where black does not fianchetto, but E6 and G6 is almost always bad if white can play D4. This position is terrible for black because white starts attack on king side. There is a rule, very well known rule, that can apply in numerous of the openings. When kings castled on opposite sides of the board, as a rule, whoever succeeds in attack first wins the game. White is way ahead of black. And the reason for that is pawn on G6. So, next move, white wants to play H5 and open the H file, which is very hard for black to prevent. And after we open the H file, black is not even close to developing their pieces. So this position is very, very bad for black. H5 was tried. Of course, material, like if we sacrifice pawn or two, it doesn't make any difference as long as we open files on the king side. F5. Now, F5 to support the G4 pawn, and probably in maybe preparing refuge for black's king to F7. HG, knight takes G6, and knight takes F5. This is very powerful blow. Not taking knight is not going to help because black's king position is completely open. Now bishop c4 check, and you see black has an extra piece, but white has every piece in attack. Position is totally lost. Rook f7, e takes f, knight e5, bishop takes f7. Black has two minor pieces for a rook, but is their position defendable? Absolutely not. Most of the pieces are still undeveloped. So knight d5, b5, rook g1. White will have knight, queen, bishop, and both rooks in attack. And black has not even developed yet. d6, rook takes g4, bishop takes f5, rook g3. Simply threatening rook to g1, double rooks, and winning bishop on g7. King f8, rook g1, knight e7, rook takes g7, and I don't think we should continue this. It's a simple two-move calculation will end all this struggle. We got to endgame with extra rook for white, and as a rule, it's resignable. Actually, very easy to play game for white. That's based on understanding of the power of the position. When kings castle on the opposite side, As a rule, in this variation, it's hopeless for black because white is a lot faster. There's a second game against the same opponent. We will see. Now he tried to play a little bit different. Again, G6 and E6. Never play G6 and E6 when white can play D4. For some reason, my opponent kept doing it, and that's something I cannot explain. After E5, again, terrible position for black because of the dark square weaknesses. Now knight is going to come to E4 and D6. The bishop on C8 is like a tall pawn, and position is awful. F5, trying to prevent knight E4, but it doesn't prevent knight B5. King F8, knight D6. Black is already completely boxed. I was surprised. I know the player is a good player, but why he kept going for the same type of position in 2 consecutive games? Games were played like 5 minutes apart. H4, and you see the knight on G8 is terrible. I'm not going to even mention both of the rooks and king, so knight H6 was played. I want to mention here that H4 is more like defensive move. We want to stop all kinds of attempts for black to play G5. H4, knight H6. Now we just complete development. And now H5. Just now we tried to prevent G5. And in this case, we encourage D5. Why are we so inconsistent? Because it's based on concrete calculation. Because after G5, we have this super powerful check and Queen H2. Queen is coming to H5. Could black have played king back? No. Queen G3 will lead to more devastating results. Now knight takes F7 is coming. G4 pawn is terrible. And that's why king G6. And now knight takes E5. Queen H5 check. That simply leads to a mate. King F6, queen takes G5. There was no defense, and another big blow to black's attempt to play E6 and G6. As a rule, it leads to absolutely devastating results, and you saw those by last 2 games I just showed you to you. Here is the game with non-fianchetto for black, and you're gonna see how white got big positional advantage. And I know a number of players, high-rated players, sometimes play like this for black. E5 move. I analyzed this position and I came to conclusion that the best move is Fe. And after knight takes, to play knight F3. Well, in this game, knight F3 was played, D6, and now Fe, DE, and bishop B5. Now this is an interesting move. Just as good is bishop C4. If I was asked which one is better, I would have difficulties answering that. Both moves are very good, and they have different ideas. Bishop on C4 just stands very well, And I want you to understand why we don't put bishop on c4 in general on c4. In general, we don't put bishop on d4 because, for example, knight c3, knight c6, f4, either g6 or e6. If we put bishop on c4, bishop on c4 can be disabled by pawn on e6. Not right away, maybe bishop g7, and later pawn on e6. And this is completely different game, but I don't like, and I would never recommend anyone to put bishop on a position where it's looking into a stone wall. That's why I wouldn't want to do that. In this game, we could put bishop on c4. Bishop cannot be blocked. However, I played bishop b5. And there is a different idea. Now, e5 pawn is hanging, which has to be protected. And now, we going for a static advantage. We see pawns on c5 and c6 are terribly weak. They are isolated and doubled. Bishop on d6 is not the strongest piece on the board. And having two bishops does not really favor black. It's more like favoring white. Position, white has sizable advantage. Knight e7, castling, castle, bishop e3, knight g6, knight d2. You see, knight is heading to c4, where it will be placed perfectly. f5, desperately looking for some counterplay. Knight c4, very good move. The other knight will go to e4. And that will look really bad for black. Bishop e7, queen e2, rook b8, b3, cementing the knight on c4 and protecting the b pawn. How do we play this position? The way you play this position, you have to obey number one rule for those types of position. Make sure, unless it's necessary, you don't do anything that will change yours or your opponent's pawn formation in the center. That's why we go knight e4, we don't take on d5, and notice that if black will take on e3, black still will remain with all these pawn weaknesses, which makes their position absolutely lost. Knight takes e3, queen takes, bishop e6. Well, the beauty of having big positional advantage is because at some point you can redeem them for material. I don't know if it was the best way or not, but it's good enough way. We start collecting pawns. Knight takes e5, simply wins a pawn, and black gave up a queen. Black was absolutely, devastated with the hopelessness of their bishops versus increasing activity of white's knight. They just gave away the queen for no compensation. Queen c7, and white goes for more material. Bishop h4, knight g3, attacking rook, attacking bishop on e6. Bishop takes g3, hg, bishop d5, and c4. Here you can really stop analyzing because game absolutely lost the interest and importance. Black has no threats, and heavily down in material. And simply black got mated, but this last several moves were totally meaningless and pointless. Good example, another. In a way, it was another disaster in the opening. Sometimes you get mated, it's a disaster. When you get lost position strategically, it's a disaster. When you get position with no plan and no future, it's a disaster as well. So let's look at next game. This game against pretty strong player that definitely was prepared for the game and played knight d4. This is one of the main variations, probably the main variation of whole system. I have to point that another continuation is e5 that years ago was widely analyzed by British players and was popular, but I have different views on this opening. So I played ed, and there is my pet variation. I have to tell you, first time in a tournament, this one analyzed by me years ago, but my student Eugene Perlstein had a fortune to catch quite a strong opponent in US Junior Championship and crushing him in 16 moves, practically mating him on the board. This game was not far from that game, but he played tournament game, I played blitz game, but this makes no difference because this position, I hardly made any moves on my own. On my own, I mean on the board. Everything was home prepared. Rook b3, bishop f6, bishop d2, bishop e6, and this is the key move of the position. So what do we have here? If you look at this position, it looks terrible for white. Pawns are even. Pawn structure is terrible for white, and black has two bishops. However, black is in very bad shape after check. Most of the players I played against went king c8. But then what happens is we go rook b6. And with the threat of c6, black ends up playing bishop d5, and after knight e5, this type of position ends up being absolutely horrible for black. Well, I would say completely lost, because opposite color bishops is terrible for black here. They cannot play rook d8 because of disaster of this kind, and if they don't play rook d8, then after we retreat the rook, bishop goes to b6, sealing the rook on a8, and the rook is coming to d4 and d8. It's almost like a forced mate. For example, in this position, the best thing black can do is play b5. If this is the best thing they can do, you can imagine how bad the position is. Well, my opponent played king c6, but this is well analyzed and clearly favors white. Check, forcing to take on c5, and the key move of the game, that's what happened in Eugene Perlstein's game as well. Knight d2. Move is very powerful, threatening knight e4 and bringing rook in the game. This is 100% middle game position. Queens are off the board, but nevertheless position is a middle game. And black's king is in grave danger. Bishop d5, c4. Why this move? Because black's move is obvious. And now the final blow. I say final blow, it's far from being final move, but this move decides the fate of the game. Rook d1. The threat is knight b3 check, rook b4 check. Every move is forced. And now rook d4 check, check with a bishop. And after king b2, you will see the rook d2 check. And there are actually several different ways black king can get checkmated. So after rook d1 and long thinking, my opponent played king d4. It's an effort to escape with the king to the king side. Rook b3, eliminating king d3 possibility and creating threat of mate in one by playing bishop b6. King is forced to come back. That's how bad it is. Bishop check, and the rest. Well, here is a wide range of possibilities for white to win the game. We can only cover one. Now we're threatening rook e3 with a mate, and black is absolutely lost. They lose rook and maybe more. So, total disaster right after the opening. Well, I should say right in the opening. And it's a very good example. How many moves did I play on my own, thinking on the board? Maybe last 3, where it didn't really matter how good I play, as long as I don't make horrible error. And now, for example, something like king e7. We don't even take the rook. We play bishop g7, which is mate. So this is absolute another disaster for black. Next game. Now you will see the variety of different continuations. Here, black didn't play knight takes b5. This is all according to analysis. Well, what did black do? Black placed bishop on d4, which is not very good square. On the other hand, white's bishop on b3 is not standing that well. This is also part of the preparation. f5, I had this position before and I played e5. I had this position before and I played knight e2. But after analysis, I came to conclusion that f5, with the help of Ripka, of course, I came to conclusion that f5 gives white serious advantage. That's what happened in this game, f5, and black didn't last long after that. G takes f. Now we take on d5. You see, now if black takes back with ed, they have absolutely terrible pawn formation and white continuing pressure on d5 and on e7. So what happened in the game was black took on c3, simply overlooking very simple continuation. Now, so here, black is virtually busted. Well, knight d5 can be criticized because it's a bad move, but there are no good moves in this position. Something like fe will lead to another type of disaster. Now white has 2 bishops. Black cannot castle. Their position is torn apart, and the development is absolutely terrible. This position is terribly, hopelessly lost. What happened in this position is good example of total destruction in the opening. Key is the F5 move. Black has serious problems after F5. If E takes F, even knight takes D5 gives us very serious advantage. And now bishop H6 is coming after C3. This could have been the best way to play for Black, but it's far from satisfactory positions. Now I want to go to a next game that was different type of play, different type of position. E6. See, the rule that I told you 3 games ago when I analyzed, well, G6 and E6 should never be played if white can go D4. We can go D4, but I played bishop E3 first because we like to play bishop takes D4 after D4. There is no move here that can stop white from playing D4. For example, E5 will lead to a loss of a pawn, and D5 is not possible because of the same weakness on C5. My opponent played knight E7, D4. The best try in this position is B6 move. Move that been played by my opponent leads to absolutely horrible results. Well, if D5, then we can play E5, and you see absolutely terrible bishop on C8, something like knight F5 on knight C6. Doesn't really matter because queen F2 we're going to go. And by the way, here is one-time threat knight E4, trying to go to F6 because of the pin. Of course, black can stop it, but black hardly can stop the white's attack on the king side. Well, maybe not immediately, the queen H4 because of queen B6 check. Even the plan like H3 is very strong. And bishop D7, knight H2, and you see knight is going to G4. And black cannot really stop this knight because now his knight is going to come back to F3, and after G4, black's position is going to collapse in a matter of few moves. So what happened? Opponent chose knight C6. Now queen takes D6. And queen takes B2. Why rook F2? Because we need to protect the C2 pawn. And it was check. So rook F2 is better move than king H1. And after queen takes B2, queen C5, black is facing terrible threat, rook B1. Queen B4, trying to exchange queens, queen E3. Now, this move signals to final blow on the king side. You see there, black has no pieces on queen side. F5 is coming with queen H6 that may immediately shatter black's king's position. So B5, black is trying to develop bishop on B7 and you cannot blame them. But now F5, E takes F, trying to open the bishop. but that's too late. Knight d5, and here black simply blundered the queen, but I don't think it matters, because even if queen goes to d6, there's queen h6 with knight g5. There's absolutely no defense. Actually, possibly the best move is e5, attacking the queen, and then knight f6 check, or maybe queen h6, coming with knight f6. Now look at this picture. Picture where every white piece is on the target. Every black's piece absolutely doomed. This is the power of this dynamic attack. Black is getting mated. Very, very convincing way to play this opening. Very convincing way to play in this variation. Now, this game, however, was played in slightly different fashion. Knight a5 move. Now, people say that knight a5, I've heard this so many times, knight a5 is a good way to play against this stupid opening. They call bishop b5 stupid opening. Well, let me respond to these people. If bishop b5 is a stupid play, how can knight c6 and putting knight on the edge of the board can be so wise? Cannot be. d4. Well, I didn't have to play d4. I could have continued with a simple castling. But d4, matter of principle. So, here we have regular type of Sicilian where by playing bishop b5 and bishop e2, white lost one tempo. By playing knight c6 and knight e5, black loses two tempos. Why? Because knight cannot stand very well on a5. It will have to come back. When you go to one square with a knight or with your any piece and coming back to same square, that's a loss of two tempos. On top of that, a6 move doesn't go together with bishop on g7, which I mean in accelerated Draken, for example, which I play all my life. a6 is not such a good way to play. So, opening result is clearly favors white. b5. Best move would have been knight c6 to admit that you lost a tempo and continue playing position. But b5 is being stubborn and trying to get a use out of knight on a5, which is very illogical. a4, and I'm trying on my end. So I could have played simply bishop f3, having very strong position. Bishop f3 preparing e2 square for knight, which would have been good as well. a4, b4, knight d4. Now here's the b4 pawn, needs desperate attention, and here is knight on a5, needs more than attention, needs a rescue. Bishop b7, castling, knight f6. If we take on b4, black has hope to take on e4. So, you will see, can you compare development of whites and blacks and knight on a5? No, that's not a good square. d6, e6. and now queen takes b4. So white is simply pawn up with a better position. Knight on a5 is still unclear what it's doing there. They simply here blunder a piece, but did it matter? I would say this is maybe the best move in the game, because position is so bad, it kind of save yourself some suffering. Objectively best move could have been knight c6, but then when we go c3, or when we go simply knight takes c6 or bishop takes a6, having this super powerful a pawn, position is lost. Of course, it's a little sarcastic that queen c8 is the best move to blunder the knight, but position, it's just to emphasize on the quality of position black has. Absolute disaster as well. This next game ended with a terrible blunder by my opponent, but in already very bad position. He got to that bad position without obvious mistakes. Well, let's see that. So after e4, c5, knight c3, standard opening moves. Castle, knight takes b5, and we know that probably the main move here is d5. However, knight f6 was played, and after d3 and castle, knight c3, now black goes d5. Well, this position is very interesting, and the way you approach this position. I play d5. It should be structurally okay for black, this position, because white puts its central pawns on f4 and e5 and blocking their c1 bishop. Black's light square bishop has nice outpost on f5, and black has very good presence in a center. But black's position is very bad because of some concrete variation in this game. Knight has to be moved. Going to d7 is not a good idea because knight takes d5, and if knight takes e5, white can simply play knight takes e7, queen takes e7, fe, and now due to bishop g5 threat and taking on e5 will give black some terrible dark square weaknesses. This position is not good for black. So that's why after e5, knight has to go to e8. But then d4 creates some immediate problems for black. What kind of problems? c5 pawn is hanging. c5 pawn cannot be protected because after b6, d takes c, b takes c, then d5 pawn is hanging. So, if pawn cannot be protected, it cannot be also advanced. Well, it can be, but let's see what is going to happen. After b3, c takes b, and a takes b. All of a sudden, white's dark square bishop gets absolutely perfect position on a3, well, on some kind of knight c7 move, bishop a3, will be dominating on that diagonal, and white has very good advantage, big advantage. Potential is to play knight e2 followed by c4. White is much better. So my opponent chose here c takes d. And here queen takes d4. Not normal knight takes d4, where black can play knight c7 and try to exchange this knight with knight e6 and have half decent position at least. As I already mentioned, this is a very concrete approach to this position. Queen takes d4. Now the pawn on d5 is hanging. Of course, e6 is out of question because it buries almost every black piece. Bishop on c8 is bad. Knight on e8 is bad. So my opponent played knight c7. That's a normal move. Now bishop e3. Knight cannot go to e6 because d5 pawn is hanging. Pawn on e6 buries the bishop on c8, so bishop f5 was played. It's a good square for a bishop. Attacking c2 pawn looks good, looks like normal. But as I already mentioned to you, this exact position is very likely for you to get if your opponent chooses this variation. Now, knight h4. This was analyzed by me before the game, of course, in preparation. Knight h4 gives white sizable advantage. Bishop takes c2 was played, and this is bad. But everything is bad here. Well, what could black do? On bishop e6, after f5, black is going to have very, very serious problems defending their king. And also, they don't want to allow knight takes f5. So bishop takes c2, rook a to c1. And white is much better. But here my opponent made a blunder. Bishop e4. He thought he could give a pawn, simply just giving a pawn and have a reasonable position. But after knight takes e4, d, e, and queen takes d8, black simply resigned because on the rook takes d8, rook takes c7, just a piece down, and black resigned. So what could black have done that was much better? Of course, they didn't have to lose a piece, but it's very, very difficult to suggest some reasonable continuation. Knight c7 almost has to be played to protect d5 pawn without killing your own bishop. And after knight c7, bishop e3, now bishop has to come out from c8. Bishop f5, knight h4. Now if bishop retreats f5, and only other practical continuation is what happened in a game, and you see how it ended. Bishop f5 here would have been a little better action, where white has absolutely controlling position, and bishop e4 led to a loss of a piece. So, not very strong game. It's something that you can easily get. It's like a everyday game that you may get in tournament or in a blitz game or whatever. So just showing you the power of this opening. Here is next game. This game was played against Canadian IM that played continuation that is very common. When you play today in a chess tournament, you would see most of the players, they try not to follow the known theory of this variation, but just try to delay castling and develop pieces a little bit unorthodox way. There is not much unorthodox in this position because both bishops fianchettoed, and black is going to play knight e7, d6, and castle. At least that's what the plan is. Bishop e3. And this is absolutely must to be played move. Because I always said it several times, when pawns on e6 and g6, you should always go d4. Because that creates a weakness on d6 and possible weakness of dark square. But after bishop e3, we are attacking the c5 pawn, and bishop e3 I played first, because when I go d4, like in the game was d6, d4, queen c7 was played, but if black took on d4, then I wanted to take back with the bishop. And it clearly favors white to exchange dark square bishops now because rook comes to d1. Terrible weakness on d4. Rook is hanging, and black is very close to be losing. Maybe they are lost here. So, in a game, happened queen c7, dc, dc, and e5. Now we locked this g7 bishop out, but black has good b7 bishop. Now this is kind of unusual game where I tried, it was not necessary when I tried positional sacrifice. Knight e7, and now queen d6. Obviously taking on d6 is out of question because c5 pawn is hanging on some kind of move like this. Bishop takes c5. So my opponent played rook c8, and that's where I could have had an advantage simply by playing rook d1, but I chose this sacrifice, and it's very interesting sacrifice. Of course, black must accept this sacrifice, and what do we get here is white is going to have two pawns and the knight for the rook. When I say two pawns, because they have no time to protect b5 pawn. Actually, b5 pawn cannot be protected, can be moved. But then after knight b5, attacking the queen and followed knight d6 check, white is going to get back the exchange, remaining with the extra pawn and totally winning position. So castling is practically forced. Knight takes b5, queen c6, and after exchange, and rook a1. You can see that black's bishop is totally blocked. Rook on c6 is 100% passive. White wants to go rook a7. Actually, this position, the more I look, the more I come to conclusion the position is almost terrible, almost hopeless for black. Well, knight on b5 is very strong, and if there is necessity, we can support this knight with pawn on c4, or bring the white knight to d2 and c4. White has very good positional outpost, and no sacrifice. There is no material deficit. We have full compensation for exchange. So knight d5 was played, bishop d2, rook b8, knight d6, and after bishop f8, knight c4. Beautiful outpost for a knight on c4. Black's rooks are totally disabled. So rook c8, trying to go rook a8. But the interesting point here, that even after rook a8, and I played rook a4, black cannot do anything on any of the open files. And it seems like rooks are absolutely out of business. Taking on a4, well, actually, black didn't take, but taking on a4 would have given white potentially two pass pawns after c3 and possibly b4. Black's position is bad, but not hopeless. So what happened in the game was bishop e7, knight g5. Now this knight is coming to e4 and possibly d6. Taking this knight will weaken black's dark squares severely. So what happened in the game, black did take, and after fg, king f8, king f3, king e7, and knight d6. Now you see this is most pitiful display of black rooks. Rook h4. Now h7 pawn all of a sudden is a weakness. f7 is also a weakness. Rook h8 was played. Pawn c4. Knight c7. Absolutely passive square. But there is no better square. Knight b6. Black's knight has absolutely no future at all. And b4 would be very, very powerful. And going knight b4 is not much better. Now white has very pleasant choice between knight e4, attacking c5 pawn in a black defense bishop e3, or very positional solution, just bishop takes b4 and c5. You see, black cannot put the rook on c-file, and now b4 pawn is hanging. White wants to take it, and potential c6 and c7 looks devastating. On top of everything, there is a rook f4, and they have to protect the f7 square. Knight turns out to be a better piece than a rook. That would have been completely lost. So black went to c7, rook f4, rook f8 must be played, and now b4. So before we pushed the pawn, we went rook f4 to put rook and king on the same diagonal in case black takes on b4. Rook b8, and now b5. And second pawn will go to b4. And on knight e8, we exchange knights, and pawn b4. Rook d8, king e2. Black must take. Protecting this pawn is out of question, because white simply takes and then pins the rook. So pawn must be taken. Bishop takes, king e8, bishop d6. Again, totally denying any open files to black's rooks. Rook b7, king d3. Now king is going forward, supporting white's pawns, and now at least one black rook is active, but it's way too late. Rook a7, c5, those pawns are absolutely unstoppable. And position is totally resignable. Mate is coming on h8, and black is down the rook. There is no defense. Very interesting positional sacrifice. But what I wanted to tell you, we didn't have to do that. It's a little bit maybe on a high-tech side, but position clearly was favoring white after the open. This game was played against Armenian grandmaster who was actually very familiar with this system, with the Grand Prix attack, and here how he handled it. Bishop c4. This maneuver, bishop b5 check, followed by bishop c4, I already explained in number of the variations. Black's bishop stands better on c8 than on d7, and particularly e6, d4. But if black played knight c6, for example, and white went e3, e6, castle, and knight e7, black does not have d5, because bishop on d7 blocks the queen, protecting the d5 square. Well, anyway, but black played e6, and again, same rule strikes when g6 and e6 played. You try d4. C takes d, knight takes d4. Now there is a terrible weakness on d6. a6, necessary move to stop knight d4 to b5. So a6, bishop e3, knight c6, queen d2, and after knight f6, castling long. And knight takes c6. Knight a4 is out of question, also because of knight takes d4, and knight on a4 is hanging. So what happened? Knight takes c6, bishop takes c6, and queen takes d6. This is also part of the preparation on this opening. As I said, I spent countless hours. That's what I would recommend you to do as well. If you try to play this opening in a serious tournament, you should try and analyze a lot of variations. What happened here? Black simply went bishop b7. On bishop takes e4, white goes knight a4 and has clear advantage because pawn on a6 is weak, knight b6 is coming, and black's pieces are little bit clumsy here. Bishop b7 was played, protect a6 pawn, knight a4, knight takes e4, but now black is absolutely lost. Material even, queens are off the board, b4 is a terrible weakness, a6 is a weakness, and there is a nothing going for black in this position. This game is virtually over. What did black do? Terrible. Couple of small mistakes in the opening. And main was e6, and that's the result of it. They are paying for it now. Bishop d5, rook takes b4, and now knight b6. Well, what did we do here? We exchanged queens, and we have extra pawn and two bishops in the endgame. It's a matter of elementary technique. d4, bishop d2. What I think here, the best try was for black to exchange knight for a bishop and go to opposite color bishop position. They are pawn down. They have some defending chances. So, however they went knight c5, they still hope for some kind of activity on the queen side. Black is more active here, but white has two bishops and extra pawn. There is no attack, but it's activity that slowly is going to be dissolved and totally disappear. So rook e8, rook e1, rook c8, bishop c4. Black was trying for some cheap shots, but after bishop c4, bishop f6 and g4, black simply resigned here. They ran out of resources, defensive resources, and white has too big of an advantage. Black resigned. Here is the game against French IM, who tried the same knight a5 move. Well, in the first game that we saw, I played, and I showed you back a couple of games earlier, I played d4. Now, I tried castling, a6 and bishop e2. They are both good continuations. d4 may be more accurate move, but this is also okay for white. Although bishop did come back to e2, black made two absolutely senseless moves, a6 and knight a5. Knight a5 especially damaging. d6, d3, knight f6, and now e5. Well, this is different position from our regular positions because white has here light square bishop. So we want to try to open it by playing e5 and now f5. Now the dark square bishop is going to be open, and it's a great potential for light square bishop going to f3. So in the game happened knight f6, bishop g5, h6, bishop takes f6, and now it's a big problem for black how to safeguard their king. Queen d2 delays castling because of the h6 pawn. g5, now queen e3 check, and after queen e7, queen f2 was possible. Queen f2 is also okay, but queen takes e7 is also very strong. And there comes white light square bishop. Bishop comes to h5. Queens are off the board, but game is way too far for calling it end game. Still middle game, still a lot of pieces on board. Very difficult, nearly lost position for black. Bishop e6. Now knight a4. I don't know about knight a4 move. Bishop f3 would have been also very good, initiating bishop d5. For example, if castling, then also rook e1 is very strong. So white has pretty big advantage here. But knight a4 I played. I'm anticipating to play knight b6. Well, in the game happened b5, bishop h5 check. And now king has to go to d8 and rook e1. Black is totally lost. Bishop takes a2, knight c3, bishop back to g8, and bishop f3. Total discoordination of the pieces. Rook c8, and now white penetrates with all their pieces. Rook a1, rook takes a6, knight e4. Knights are way more powerful than bishops. b4, knight a4, knight's coming to b6 now, and you see That's what typical for this opening. Position simplifies, but always white's pieces end up being a lot more active, a lot more dynamic. Absolutely no coordination between black's pieces. Bishop on g8 is awful. King is in its center and in danger. Position is totally lost. Knight takes f3, rook takes f3, bishop d5, trying to bring the rook into game. But after knight b6, bishop takes e4, de. Now black's left with a horrible bishop on e7, and white is going to bring knight on d5, will be dominating piece. Rook b8, knight d5, and after rook f8, rook f5. Now if black wants to exchange, white is going to have very powerful pass pawn and position nearly resignable. c4, rook a7, bishop is hanging, rook takes f5, ef, and after g4. It's no need to look what happened. The rest was very easy for white. Black simply resigned here after rook f2 checking, rook e1 checking f2. This is absolutely hopeless position with the piece down. But what I wanted to say here, you see, in the early stage of the game, black is trying to find new ways to play against Grand Prix. Why would they try some new ways? Maybe some people are not happy with old ways. And after knight a5, well, as I already mentioned, I played d4 in the first game, but simply castling in bishop e2 in this game, and white still got much better position. What would have happened if black on bishop g5 played bishop takes f5? Bishop takes f5 is also very dangerous. It's a terrible move actually. Knight h4, attacking the bishop, and if bishop moves, then after knight e4, pin of this f6 knight is deadly. So slowly black's position deteriorated, and you may say this is outcome of the opening. Very bad position for black. They never had a chance to castle king side, and that's exactly the problem. After g5, queen e3 check, and after exchange of queens, knight d5 could have been played also, creating numerous problems. And then, after king d8, knight d2, and bishop f3. Well, the problem with a very good position sometimes, that's too many good continuations. They are all good, but you only can play one. So I chose knight d2 move and knight a4. I'm not particularly happy with knight a4 move. Probably bishop f3 was better, and rook e1, rook fe1 or he1, or maybe even bishop h5 check. So the fact of the matter is white has sizable advantage. Now let's move to the next game against some grandmaster played who knows me very well and who was prepared for the game, and he knew what I was going to play. And here is what he came up with. He came up with one of the worst continuations black can come up with. I explain people in lessons, in lectures, on DVD, in any way I can, that after e6, black's position is completely lost. This is a positional evaluation and not because we have strong attack. E5. And the reason why you lost here, because you have two dead bishops. That if white plays correctly, those bishops will never get in the game without significant loss. Let's see what happened in this game. E5, knight A4, protecting the pawn, and now this C4 move seals the bishop on C8. So now black will never have a chance to play C4, and then possibly after that C5, and free the bishop on diagonal, on B7, H1 diagonal. After move C4, both bishops are more like tall pawns. H5, B3, bishop A3, queen E2. This stage is absolutely hopeless stage for black. Now what we have is an extra pawn in much better position. Well, the reason for king G1 is to avoid some possible check on G3 and opening H file with a tempo. It's just prophylactic move. The position is very static, so we can act slowly here. Queen F2, D4, C5. This is the move that is very important because it seals the fate of the light square bishop. We shouldn't give black a chance to go C5 and put the bishop on C6. So after C5 for white, black's bishop on D7 will never see light of day. Knight E3, black wins exchange, but this is absolutely hopeless. Black has an exchange, but they have cocktail of dead pieces. There is no single file that's open, which makes black's rooks absolutely disabled. Bishop on D7 needs no comment, and queen is not coming out anywhere. Meanwhile, we have knights, and they can get practically anywhere inside black's position. So rook b4, knight b6. Of course, taking on c5 is out of question. So bishop e8. Now c5 is hanging. So knight e4, protecting c5 pawn. And knight c8. You see the knight goes to d6. Now this is absolutely dead. And taking on g2 will just not change anything, the character of the position. And what happened, black took anyway, knight f6. And you see, this is like a work of art, knights. Well, nothing was invented by me. It's like an ABC of a strategy. These knights are much better. Each one of these knights is better than black rook. Bishop d7, rook b1. Now a3, queen takes d4, and knight f5 check, simply winning black's queen. Well, position, of course, if black didn't play rook h3, is absolutely hopeless and helpless for black. Those knights will never let them breathe freely. Actually, very good example of positional strangulation. Well, now let's see another game against the same opponent. But now he allows, you see, when we said never play e6 and g6 if d4 is possible. d4 is possible. This position is already difficult for black. d6 pawn is very weak. Queen d2, castling long. Black didn't want a castle short. What will happen in this position? If black castles short and goes knight c6, white goes h4. We already seen one game with a similar setup. Next move is going to be h5, and move after that, the file, h file, is going to open against the black's king, and that may have very serious consequences. Meanwhile, black's attack on queen side is way too late. So black decided not to castle on the king side, and they decided to castle on queen side. Knight c6, castling long, and rook d8. Now they changed their mind, castling on queen side, and there is good reason behind it. After the castle, white would have played the same as after rook d8, which was knight to b5. Now imagine black castled, and then we play knight b5. The consequences here are absolutely devastating. Knight takes check, then take on f7, then get the rook. We already have 3 pawns. We're going to have 3 pawns and a rook for 2 minor pieces, and they are all scattered and no coordination. Hopelessly lost. On top of everything, bishop b6 is a threat. Well, actually, bishop b6 could have played even move b4. Well, opponent played rook d8, and then knight b5. Pawn takes, knight takes, queen b8. Now white has only 2 pawns for a piece, but you see how still-mated all black's pieces are. And now e5, shutting off the bishop on g7. Rook d7, queen f2. It's a pitiful display of black things on a back rank. You can't even call them chess pieces. They are so bad, it's some kind of a furniture. Knights on e7, c6, useless furniture. h5, king b1, king g8. It may not be the most precise way for white to play, but it's good enough. Black makes an attempt to bring the pieces in the game, but after g4, actually, again, not necessity. It's a good move. I could have played h3, but g4 is kind of instant killer because pawn has to be taken. Check. We open the h file. You see, now taking bishop will lead to instant mate on h7. That's why g4 was played. And after bishop f5, bishop takes e5, queen h4, and that didn't stop white from bringing queen h7, and black simply resigned. This is actually good show for white. Good show for white's case. What happened here? Again, I said it before, that do not play g6 and e6 if d4 is possible. I play accelerated dragon for black myself. I never allow d4 move. Well, I allow d4 move, but that's why I don't play e6. Well, d4 not as strong with the pawn on e7. But now this position becomes very dangerous for black. Actually, if castle, knight b5, if rook d8, that's what happened in a game, knight b5, and if castle short, then h4 is absolutely devastating. So the fact of the matter is black is already in very bad shape right here in this position, and it's very difficult to criticize black what they did from this point. This is already, the damage has been done already. Position is bad, and I know those positions very well because I spend hundreds of hours playing them and also working on them. That's what I do. Now, this is another display of a power of White's system. In the Grand Prix attack, very frequently black ends up to bishop advantage. Like in this game, black has two bishops. And here is the battle. White tries to keep position closed and get some advantage in a pawn structure. And black tries to open position to use their bishops properly. And this is the game against some quite strong player. I don't want to mention names, was played on the internet as well. d3, knight h6, castling both sides, and h3. h3 is a useful move, trying to prevent knight or bishop to come on g4. And the position is somewhat closed, and action will be developing slowly here. White has an advantage, in my opinion, because it's quite difficult to activate those bishops. b5. This move clearly creates weakness for black. Weakness is c5 pawn. Bishop e3 and c4. This is the obvious quest for opening position and for using actively their bishops. But what about the knight on h6? It's not a good looking piece there. And after c4, what happens? Black's pawn structure gets damaged severely, and this is very bad move. D takes c, and game immediately from the opening, bypassing the middle game, turns into the end game. What is going to happen here? Black simply played bc. If they went b4 after knight a4, white has absolutely winning advantage. They have possession of c5 square, all dark weaknesses on dark square weaknesses on the queen side, and white has an extra pawn. So what happened in the game, my opponent simply took back, hoping to use b-file and dynamics of the bishops. However, after exchange of queen and knight e5, he realized that his position is very, very bad. Now, c6 and c4 pawns are hanging. but it's not so much a pawn, it's just bishops never get activated. Bishop b7, so he gave up c4. Saving a pawn by playing bishop takes e5 is not much better, because now you see this lonely knight on h6 is in danger, and after king g7, white can go bishop c5, and position next to hopeless. And white will go rook d1, and white's piece is simply dominating here. So what happened? He decided simply to give up a pawn. Now knight takes c4, and white has decisive advantage on the queen side. Again, trying to double white's pawn to diminish the material advantage will lead to absolutely crushing pressure for white on dark square on queen side, such as rook b1, bishop c5, knight a5, and awful knight on h6. So that wasn't an option. Actually, position is already totally lost for black. c5, well, e5 was played. Now we don't want to take on c5 because bishop takes c3 and the possible rook c8. So now what we need to do, we play here e5. We're letting this knight come into the game, but we permanently closing the bishop on g7. So what happened? Knight f5, bishop takes c5, and after rook c8, b4. At this point, nothing matters but the fact that white has two extra pawns. Black was successful opening the light square bishop, but they have completely dead dark square bishop. No queens on the board, position is quiet, and there is not even close compensation for deficit of 2 pawns. e6, rook d1, and after exchanging of rooks and bishop f8, knight d6. Well, this position is absolutely hopeless, and I don't think we should continue analyzing this game, because under normal circumstances, black would resign in this position. But game went on, and of course black lost, given that it was a blitz game and a time pressure factors. Position is totally hopeless, and game lost now any interest. Very interesting was the next game, playing against some very high-rated player, grandmaster, and this was actually quite interesting battle. We know this position. We have had on these DVDs several times already. Knight c6. You see here, black didn't play a bad move like we saw in a couple of games, and they went knight c6, d3, knight f6, castle, and queen e1. We are on the way to the normal plan, queen h4, followed by f5. Knight a5 was played. Black is desperate to get white's very active looking bishop. And what happened, I already explained it once. This is absolutely great outcome of the opening because White did what they designed to do. They exchanged light square bishop for queenside knight of blacks. Now, the other advantage of White's position is that they have double pawns on B file, which slows down significantly Black's counterplay on queenside and opens White's hands for continuing attack on the king side. Bishop c6, queen h4, everything according to a plan. e6, well, f5, and after ef, bishop g5. This is our standard approach to e6 move. When black plays e6, we go f5 and put bishop on g5, after which this pin of knight on f6 and queen on d8 becomes severe, and it's very difficult to overcome unless black plays h6. So what happened? Black did play h6. Queen f4. Very difficult position for black, if not lost. Queen e7 was played. I don't think it's a good move, but if f takes e, attacking the knight on f3, we can simply play d takes e. And now, besides knight being hanging, white can play rook d1 and d6 pawn severely weak. So position would be very bad. So queen e7 was played. Rook e1. Well, we could have taken on f5, but the black had in mind queen e3 check, and after exchange of queen, rook is hanging on f1, pawn on c2, and pawn on f5. So e takes f wasn't a good move, so after rook e1, knight e5, knight takes e5. Now black suffers material losses. Pawn takes e5, pawn takes f5. You see, now f6 is threatened. Pawn on e5 is hanging, so black is nearly forced to take on f4, and now f4 pawn is weak. So after g5, white has here an extra pawn, and very accurate move, rook e5, causes black more losses. Pawn on c5 is hanging. Black doesn't really have a time to protect this pawn, because after b6, white would play f6, and all pawns on the king side gonna fall. So it's not possible to protect those pawns. So what happened on rook e5 was king g7, trying to prevent f6, but now black is down 2 pawns. They look for some activity, but h4 is a good move, maybe not necessary, but well, the other option would have been king f2 and rook e1 possibly. And h4 simply breaks a pawn chain on the king side. Pawn takes h4, rook takes f4, h3. Now black is down 3 pawns, and obviously when you're down 3 pawns, you have to have some kind of a mating attack to compensate. And this is not even close. f6 check and h4. Everything is protected by white. They have big material advantage with no visible compensation, just some occasional threats. Rook g5, white is very solid with 3 extra pawns. Game with few more moves, and I don't think it's important to see what exactly happened here. Position is absolutely lost. There is a threat of mate on d8. Not really a mate, but if rook takes f6, rook d8 will win a piece, and when you are up knight into pawns, it is equivalent to a mate. Very instructive game. Very interesting and instructive to see Black's disaster in next game. This game was played on internet this exactly same way, position transposed to the game that was played by very talented young kid Daniel Gurevich, that we analyzed in one of our previous DVDs of the novelties. Actually, it was analyzed in the number 100 DVD. This position, we have already had it. And e5 was played, knight d7 and f5. Knight takes e5, and here I mentioned that fe, knight takes e5, and queen h5 instead of fe was very strong. That's exactly what happened in this game. And if Black makes some moves trying to defend an extra pawn, that's exactly what happened. You're going to see this was all analyzed by me way before the game, and this position is nearly disastrous for Black. Bishop f4, and there is a simple threat. F takes e, and the knight on e5 is hanging. So castle, Black simply ignores. And now g6. It's interesting to point here how quickly Black loses this position. This is already absolutely hopeless position for Black. All White needs to do is to find a final blow. And final blow was delivered by the problem kind of move, e7. After e7, Black can virtually resign, but since it's a slow time control game, Black continues on. Queen takes e7. Only other option would have been taking the queen, because taking pawn with a bishop is out of question. But if Black takes queen, they face absolute disaster after knight takes d5. Now bishop is hanging, and if bishop moves, there is a simply check, and rook on a8 is hanging. So position is total disaster. That's why after e7, queen takes e7. That doesn't save Black. Knight takes d5. You see, now Black cannot move the queen. If queen moves anywhere, knight takes bishop with a check, followed by queen takes knight. Now Black is forced to take White's queen, and they are down an exchange down material. They have broken pawn structure. They don't have any material compensation, not even a pawn. And game is practically over. There's a few more moves were made here. And this is unnecessary continuation of the game, and black resides. Very, very instructive game. So that's actually to add to your knowledge. This is addition for you. So in this position, I'm sure my opponent planned on it, and he expected me to play e takes f, in which case rook takes f7, and position is playable, although still white is better. But e7 move, highly unusual tactical shot that absolutely on the spot ends the game. Well, next two games were played against the same opponent that he wrongly evaluated his position, opening outcome as satisfactory, and he faced disaster in both of these games. So he played the first one, and he lost, and then made an improvement in the second one. Improvement as he thought, and also lost. Well, let's see what happened here. This is non-fianchetto version. And the normal move here is knight f6, in which white plays e5 and has an advantage, and I covered it more than once on various different DVDs. Detailed analysis of this move after d takes e, f takes e, and knight d5. So, and white plays knight e4, and now knight takes e5 is out of question because knight takes, followed by knight takes f7. So apparently my opponent knew this analysis, because in both games that we played, he played bishop f6. This move was analyzed by me before the game, and I played bishop e3, and after knight e7, e5. D takes c, bishop takes c6 first, knight takes c6, and f takes. In this position, white has very serious advantage. In the first game, black played bishop e7, but now they have two passive bishops on d7 and e7, and key point of the position is the pawn on e5. Pawn on e5 severely limits black's activity, black's minor pieces activity, and guarantees white some attacking possibilities. After queen e1, queen is coming to g3, queen c7. Well, castling would be very dangerous, because queen g3 with the idea of bishop h6 and knight g5, f-file is open and black's position may be very dangerous. So black decides to delay castling by queen c7, and now queen g3, g6. Obviously they are not going to castle after creating these weaknesses, they are not going to castle kingside. So the destination for black's king is a queenside. Knight e4, exploring the weaknesses on f6, exploiting the weaknesses on f6 and d6. Knight b4, bishop g5, exchanging dark square bishops. This is very typical for dark square bishops and making dark squares on f6 and d6 even weaker. Bishop c6. Well, I have to point that knight takes c2 is a very bad idea, because if white plays simply rook c1, you can see knight cannot go on d4 because pawn is pinned. And if black knights go to b4, then after taking and playing rook takes c5, it's a matter of few moves when black king will get mated. Knight fg5 is coming, position is total disaster. So bishop c6 was played because of that. Knight d6 check. Here we completely dominate the dark squares. Now, white has several ways to take advantage of these dark squares. I chose knight e5, attacking f7 and forcing to play f5. And now d7 check. This is shortest, but by far not the only way to win for white. Simple rook f2 would have done the job as well. Black's king has absolutely nowhere to go. Castling is not possible. And black just has to stand and wait when white plays something like bishop h4 and queen g5, or when queen penetrates, dominating position of a knight on e5 and bishop on g5 is way too much for black to handle. However, I played d7, and this seems to be probably the quickest way to win. And now knight c4, knight comes to d6 with a check, and queen comes to e5. That will end black's miserable existence here. Queen c6, knight check, queen e5, and after king g8, bishop h6, unstoppable mate on g7, black resigned. Actually very interesting, and it's typical for Grand Prix disasters. This is something you may have in your games. So watching outcomes of these games may be very helpful for your playing Grand Prix. So next game, and the same opponent, and I see where he will show you where he deviated. So here he played knight takes e5. In the previous game he played bishop e7. So apparently he thought that he lost the game, and he didn't like his position after bishop takes e7. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5. I think my opponent expected me to play bishop takes c5, which is a bad move for many reasons. First of all, black can play queen h4 and sacrifice bishop on g3, and this is not the position white wants to play. Secondly, there is simply bishop takes h2 shot, and then queen c7 check. Of course, e5 move and this pawn sacrifice was prepared before the game, and bishop takes c5 in this position was never an intention. The move was queen h5, attacking f7, pawn and bishop on e5. This move is forced, and now knight e4. Now it's safe to take pawn on c5 with an advantage, but it's a lot stronger to play knight e4. Again, black is in dire straits here. The king has problem castling, and black is in a lot of trouble. b6, protecting the c5 pawn, of course, was not necessary. The reason behind b6 move is very simple. Black doesn't know what to do. There is no way they can conclude their development somehow. So b6 was played. Bishop g5. Now this is a final blow, and after this, I think we can stop analyzing. Taking on g5 is out of question. It's a mate on f7. And now it's coming disaster on f6, after which king will be stuck in the center, and all these massive pieces of white will be attacking bare king. Game is over. g6, knight d6 check, very precise. King e7, bishop takes f6. Well, if king f8, we can simply play here. It's very difficult to find a move that doesn't win immediately. All these bishop h6, queen h6, they are absolutely disastrous here. Queen h6 check wins everything. And if bishop goes to g7, there is a rook takes f7, leads to immediate mate. So that's why king e7 was played. Bishop takes f6. Queen takes d6. Now both queens are hanging, but after queen e5 check, black resigned. King has to move, and if nothing else, we just simply take total disaster for black. Now, what did we learn from these games? I have to make one confession. I picked those games from hundreds and hundreds. I only gave you my games because these Grand Prix continuations, I don't think anyone spent nearly as much time analyzing as I did, and I spent, I don't know, hundreds of hours, maybe more, and I know them the best. Why I picked those games from hundreds and hundreds of games that I have? Because I didn't pick them by the quality of the game. No. I kept the quality aside. I picked games by the level of expectancy. What should you expect? I don't want to show you brilliant combination, great positional play. No, I wanted you to see what you can expect when you play these games. And what you can expect is something like what you have seen. I did not put the games where black makes absolutely horrible move in the game that it's obvious for everyone to understand. No, I gave you some disasters that have been caused by inaccurate moves by invisible mistakes by black. This is something you may have today if you play the game now. And this is something can be expected. So I gave you over 20 games, and I hope you made a good judgment by these games, what was right, what was wrong. Also, I hope games were very instructive and you enjoyed them. We will continue series on typical games in certain useful openings, and I thank you very much for your attention.